When innocent Masuku stepped onto the Britain's Got Talent stage, his voice didn't just echo through the auditorium, it pierced the hearts of millions. The South African opera singer, with a humble smile and soaring voice, seemed like a gift from another world. Judges called him flawless, viewers wept. For a moment, it felt like the world had rediscovered a forgotten kind of beauty. But what the cameras didn't show, and what few could have imagined, was the tragic story he carried with him. A story filled with heartbreak, betrayal, and devastating silence from the very industry that once promised to lift him up. Before the spotlight found him, Innocent had already been through more than most artists endure in a lifetime. Homelessness, rejection, and the crushing weight of dreams deferred. He sang not for fame, but for survival. And even after his unforgettable BGT performance brought global praise, something dark lingered beneath the surface. Promises were made. Headlines screamed his name. But in the months that followed, something went terribly wrong. Innocent vanished from the spotlight, leaving fans confused and concerned. Behind the scenes, a series of brutal blows began to unravel the life he had worked so hard to rebuild. Now the truth is coming to light. What really happened to innocent Masuku after BGT? Why did a voice so pure, so powerful, disappear just when it seemed he had finally been heard? And what heartbreaking tragedy continues to haunt the man who once made the world fall silent with a single note? Stay with us, because once you hear what innocent Masuku has endured, it will change the way you see the show and the industry forever. Before the lights of Britain's Got Talent ever touched his face, before the crowd leapt to its feet and before the world saw him as a gifted tenor, innocent Masuku lived in a kind of silence most people could never endure. Born in South Africa, Innocent's early years were marked not by applause, but by quiet suffering. Raised in poverty, fighting not just for opportunity, but for dignity. He grew up in an environment where dreams were considered luxuries, and every step forward felt like a battle against the impossible. Music, for him, wasn't just an escape, it was his only refuge. From an early age, he showed a natural, almost divine talent for classical singing. But opera? That belonged to another world. White tie galas, European concert halls, elite conservatories. It was a world people like him weren't meant to enter. And yet, with sheer resilience and the kind of raw, aching beauty that only life's hardest lessons can give a voice, Innocent defied the odds. He clawed his way into music programs, auditioned with trembling hands, and studied on borrowed time and borrowed money. He knew what it meant to starve. He knew what it meant to sleep on floors. And yet, his voice, rich, resonant, and unshakably sincere, only grew more powerful through every hardship. By the time he appeared on Britain's Got Talent, most people assumed he was just another overnight sensation. What they didn't see was the mountain he had already climbed. When Innocent stepped onto that stage and sang Caruso with tears in his eyes, it wasn't just a performance, it was a release. It was everything he'd held back for years, pouring out in one desperate, breathtaking moment. The judges were stunned. Amanda Holden called it perfection. Simon Cowell, often skeptical of operatic acts, was visibly moved. The performance went viral. Millions watched, cried, shared. Headlines called him the South African Pavarotti. For the first time in his life, Innocent felt seen, not just as a survivor, but as an artist. But fame is a fickle friend, and behind the scenes, something far darker was already unfolding. While the public assumed he was being flooded with offers, contracts, and career-changing deals, Innocent found himself in a strange and cruel limbo. Promises were made but never kept. Doors opened and slammed shut in the same breath. Management teams circled, only to pull away when they realized he wasn't a marketable pop star with a social media following. He was something purer, and to many in the industry that meant less profitable. Suddenly the spotlight dimmed. His phone stopped ringing. His name vanished from the headlines. For Innocent, who had believed that BGT would be the miracle he'd been waiting for, the silence was louder than ever. He returned to South Africa with no record deal, no tour, and no real explanation for why his moment had slipped away. And once again he found himself fighting, this time not to prove his talent, but to survive the heartbreak of being forgotten. To be lifted up and then abandoned, it was a wound that no applause could heal. The dream hadn't just stalled, it had shattered. But what Innocent didn't know then was that this was only the beginning of a deeper tragedy, one that would test his spirit, his health, and his will to sing ever again. After the thunderous applause faded and the headlines cooled, Innocent Masuku found himself standing at a crossroads he never expected. The world had watched him sing with angelic force, had lifted him high on a wave of praise, only to leave him stranded without the support to survive the fall. What most fans didn't know was that behind the elegant stage lights of Britain's Got Talent, there existed a quiet machinery of pressure, exploitation, and carefully managed narratives. Innocent believed, like so many contestants before him, that the show would change his life. And it did, but not in the way he hoped. While some contestants are quickly absorbed into a whirlwind of PR agents, music deals, and media appearances, Innocent was met with something far colder: silence, then misdirection, and finally betrayal. Promised meetings were cancelled without warning. Emails from hopeful collaborators were rerouted and ignored. Management teams, who once swarmed him with praise, suddenly pulled away, citing logistical issues and market confusion. Innocent had given them everything: his story, his voice, his pain, but now, when he needed guidance the most, he found himself utterly alone. The tragedy wasn't just in the rejection. It was in the false hope he had been given. For a man who had spent his life fighting to be heard, to be welcomed into the highest levels of British television, only to be quietly pushed aside, was nothing short of cruel. But the deeper pain came from within the community he trusted. Reports began to surface that some insiders believed his operatic talent was too niche for mainstream appeal, that he lacked the commercial packaging to survive in the modern music industry. In other words, his art was beautiful, but not profitable enough. Innocent wasn't angry. He was heartbroken. Because for him, singing wasn't about fame. It was about purpose. His voice wasn't a product, it was a message. A testament to survival, to resilience, to the divine power of music to elevate even the most broken soul. He had believed BGT would help him share that message with the world. Instead, he found himself back in South Africa, trying to piece together a life from shattered dreams and shallow promises. The emotional toll was immense. Friends say he became quieter, more withdrawn. He still sang, but not with the same joyful abandon. And yet, even in the shadows of betrayal, he tried to hold on to hope. He continued training, performing in small venues when possible, always chasing that elusive moment when his voice might reach the world once again. But behind the scenes, the industry continued to look away. For them, Innocent was last year's story, a beautiful voice with no hook, no tabloid drama, no gimmick to sell. And in that cold calculus, they forgot the most essential truth. Innocent Masuku wasn't just a singer. He was a soul crying out to be heard. His tragedy wasn't failure, it was abandonment. He did everything right. He moved hearts. He brought audiences to tears. And yet, the silence that followed his brilliance became deafening. It was a silence not of absence, but of betrayal. And as Innocent tried to navigate this heartbreaking void, one question loomed large in his heart. If the world could hear me, why did they stop listening? For Innocent Masuku, silence was once a burden he carried in the absence of opportunity. Now it became something much heavier, the silence of the world turning its back after promising it would never let go. The months after Britain's Got Talent weren't just disappointing, they were devastating. What Innocent experienced wasn't a gentle fading of the spotlight, but a sharp, sudden erasure, as though the moment he stepped off that stage, the machine behind him shut down without warning. There were no tours, no albums, no record label deals, no structured career path. And while the public assumed he had been launched into stardom, Innocent was quietly spiraling in private. The emotional weight of such a betrayal doesn't just bruise the ego, it cracks the soul. To go from being hailed as a generational voice to struggling once again with financial insecurity and lack of direction felt like a cruel joke. Those close to him said he tried to stay hopeful, but his smile grew thinner with each passing month. He had no fallback, no safety net. Music wasn't just his dream, it was all he had, and now even that was being taken from him. To make things worse, his health began to decline. Strained by stress, emotional fatigue, and the mental toll of abandonment, Innocent's body started to reflect the pain he had long kept buried. Friends described him as tired, not just physically, but spiritually. It wasn't just that he wasn't singing. It was that he no longer could. His voice, once so full of fire and light, began to falter, not from lack of skill, but from deep sadness. It's a truth many don't understand. Heartbreak lives in the body, and when your soul is broken, even your most divine gifts can begin to fade. For a while, Innocent disappeared entirely from public view. Fans who had once celebrated his BGT performance started asking online, "Where is Innocent Masuku?" But no official updates came. The media didn't follow up. The producers who once embraced him had long since moved on. And so, quietly and painfully, a once rising star sank into obscurity. But even in this darkness, a flicker remained. Because despite the pain, Innocent never lost his love for music. It still burned inside him, faint but real. Some say he began teaching again, helping others find their voices, even as his own struggled to return. Others say he spent time in prayer, meditation, and reflection, trying to make peace with what had been taken from him. What's clear is that Innocent Masuku, the man with the voice that brought a nation to tears, was left behind by a system that values spectacle over substance. A system that will take your trauma and talent for ratings, then vanish when the cameras stop rolling. And through it all, Innocent remained who he always was, humble, faithful, and heartbreakingly human. He didn't lash out. He didn't seek revenge. He simply tried to heal in the quiet, just as he had before. But the cost was enormous, and as his voice faded from public memory, one truth became painfully clear. What Innocent Masuku endured was not just a missed opportunity, it was a tragedy. A tragedy of neglect, a tragedy of silence, and a tragedy of a world that heard something pure and chose to walk away. Innocent Masuku was never meant to be just another contestant. He wasn't a gimmick, a passing trend, or a novelty act to dazzle the crowd and then fade quietly into the shadows. He was something rare, something real. A voice forged not in luxury or privilege, but in pain, prayer, and persistence. When he opened his mouth to sing, it wasn't just music, it was survival. And for one brief, shining moment on the stage of Britain's Got Talent, the world finally saw what he had carried inside for so long. But the tragedy of Innocent's story isn't just in what happened afterward, it's in what didn't happen. There was no label stepping in to nurture his artistry, no agent protecting him from the harsh machinery of commercial entertainment. No sustained push to develop the career he so clearly deserved. Instead, he was forgotten, even as his performance continued to circulate online, gathering millions of views from people who had no idea that the man behind the voice was struggling just to stay afloat. The tragedy deepens when you realize that Innocent didn't ask for much. He didn't demand riches or fame, only a fair chance to do what he was born to do. And that chance was quietly taken from him the moment the spotlight turned elsewhere. But despite everything, the abandonment, the shattered hopes, the health challenges, he never spoke bitterly. He never lashed out at the industry that used his story and discarded him like so many others. Instead, he retreated into dignity, holding on to what little he had left. His integrity, his faith, and his belief that music still had a place in his life, even if the world had stopped listening. And perhaps that's the most heartbreaking part of all, not the silence that surrounded him after BGT, but the silence of us, the audience, the viewers, the fans who wept at his performance but didn't think to ask what came next. We assumed the machine would take care of him, that the system would do right by him. But Innocent Masuku fell through the cracks wide enough to swallow the very heart of his dream. Yet in the quiet, a question remains. Is it too late to listen now? Because Innocent is still here, still alive, still, somewhere carrying that same voice, though now bruised by heartbreak and dulled by neglect. He deserves more than sympathy. He deserves a second chance. Not because of a viral clip, not because of television drama, but because true talent doesn't fade. It simply waits to be heard again. And maybe, just maybe, there's still time for the world to do what it failed to do the first time, to stand up, to reach out, and to truly support the artist behind the voice. Innocent Masuku is more than a moment on a stage. He is a living reminder that brilliance often goes unnoticed until it's gone, and a painful warning of what happens when the industry treats artists like disposable content rather than human beings with souls, with stories, with struggles. His voice may have been silenced by the system, but it is not lost. And perhaps if enough people remember, it can rise again.